When I joined Seven Angels, those guys are all like Christian straight edge vegans, and I'm this, Canadian meat eating, very different lifestyles.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. This has been a guest that I've been very excited to chat with all week. Someone who's been a band that I think inarguably is in one of the most, will go down as one of the most legendary and influential metalcore bands of just history in general. Someone that I've gotten to play with as well. And so without further ado, I'm very excited to be welcoming Jesse of Misery Signals and Compromise to the podcast. Dude, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, obviously, Misery Signals is a band that needs no level of introduction as far as your guys's, breadth as far as how much you've done over the years, and there's so much history and lore that is attached to that band, as well as Compromise. It seems like any band that you have touched, there's so much backstory and so much for people to discover, whether it's through a podcast or a documentary. So there's definitely a lot of things that we can get into there. But before we get into anything music chat related, Jesse, we need to check some beverages for the show. So what are you going to be drinking for the podcast today?
I just have straight water here today.
Okay. No flavoring, just straight from the tap.
Yeah, straight, not from the tap. I can't drink tap water, so I shouldn't say that. It's from the fridge, but
okay.
Gotta be. I like cold water for sure.
Yeah, cold water is definitely, there's warm water is definitely not the move in any case, but tap room, I like to keep it cold myself as well. Are you like a Brita man, or do you have some kind of other? Is it in the fridge? Is where you?
Yeah, filters. Yeah, like Brita filters. I like for sure.
Got you. So I'm also drinking water, but I have a little bit of a story as far as the bev, choice today.
Okay.
So if you remember earlier in April this year, Comeback and Misery Signals doing a bunch of Western Canada dates, and there was 2 Calgary shows, and my band Endgame played the first of 2 days. Trench
at Dickens, yeah.
At Dickens, yes. And I was on a bit of a kick. Just hang on for 1 second. Guys, either come down or I'm shutting the door.
Dog check.
It's a dog check, absolutely. So we were playing the first of 2 Calgary dates, and I was on a bit of a kick, which started even a few months earlier than that, where I would jokingly put cases of Liquid Death in between my guitar cabs and my head. And I did this at a show in Hamilton that we played, and I just had so much on deck that I was just doing it. Was just it was an obnoxious ongoing joke for a long time. And I remember as soon as we finished playing, Misery Signals is setting up to play right after, and I saw you double take on stage, and you looked so confused. And I went up and it's I'm sure you've never seen that before. And you were like, does this mess with your tone? Or I was like, no, this is just for aesthetic. And you were like, huh. And then you walked away. And that has been just burned in my memory ever since then. So since that, I'm checking a Liquid Death for the show.
So I'm a big fan of the water in cans these days. So one issue for sure as a band guy, as band guys, I think, is that the amount of bottled water that we've had to use over the years, right? So definitely tried to avoid that as much as possible by bringing receptacles with us and stuff. But the Liquid Death, and what's the other one? There's actually a couple now that I've seen around Canada as well. So I'm a big fan of those. So yeah, I was probably stoked to see that you had some liquid death, and I might have been like eyeing them up, trying to get some from you, because it's always a challenge for me. I've basically sworn off plastic bottles, so I just won't use them. Like I basically have a rule against it. So
Right.
uh, I always have to, find some liquid death before each show. And
I
some
there
places it's really easy, and some places it's quite a challenge.
Yeah, I think that they are starting to team up with a lot of venues as far as like being able to just to be everywhere, just their presence
For
is
sure.
in those. Because I'm the very same way. I feel like guilty that I'm like, you know, I feel more guilty drinking plastic water than I do driving my car, as far as like the fumes of the car versus, this plastic bottle.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
just it's just a very weird thing for me. But
For
there
sure.
have been times while I've been playing and I desperately need a water and I don't want to call for someone to get me like, whatever the
Yeah.
stage water is.
More
So I
liquid
just
death.
go into the box on the side and pull one out.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So cheers to you,
Cheers to
Jesse.
liquid death, man.
Cheers. Well, cheers to you primarily, but yeah, dude, thanks again for coming on. So Jesse, you've done a plethora of interviews throughout many years. It actually seemed when I was prepping for this discussion, I was like, it seems that it's been a while since you've done a podcast or an interview of some case, just within like the doing stuff. It seemed like so many people were doing stuff over COVID because there was nothing to do. But
For
now
sure.
that shows have returned and Misery Signals has been out on the road a couple times, it's been a while since there's been you on a podcast. So I really appreciate you coming on. But any new guests that I have here on the show, I always like to get a bit of context about how they just got initially put on the path of heavy music in general. So take me like way back in time, like when you were first discovering this stuff and how what tickled your fancy initially on this whole journey.
So I guess connected to the water bottle thing is that I was raised by hippies. Basically, my parents are very into music. So a lot of that is classic rock, 60s rock kind of stuff. But the old man, I shouldn't say that. Both my folks were into some heavier stuff. So lots of the Stooges I would hear as a kid. The Clash, Nazareth, my dad would play. Um, he had a couple like Black Sabbath Sabotage record I remember seeing around as a kid. Like he collected vinyl. He has thousands of records, my father does. So as a kid, there was some heavier kind of punk rock stuff. Generation X he would play quite a bit, that I was exposed to. And I was certainly attracted to a lot of that stuff from an early age. Stooges for sure, Clash, London Calling. The first stuff that I really latched onto that was not influenced from my folks was hair metal. So like watching video hits. I would see Twisted Sister. The first thing I saw as a kid that I really wanted, that my parents didn't have, was Twisted Sister. So for my 6th Christmas, my Auntie Wanda got me Stay Hungry, after seeing some videos on video hits. And that was kind of the first thing that I was super into as a little guy. That led me to being into more of that stuff. So like I really loved Motley Crue growing up. That was my thing for sure. Which eventually, being kind of a skateboarder, headbanger kind of little guy, I got exposed to then, early Metallica stuff, early Megadeth stuff, Testament. So just a lot of that 80s metal, and I think it was kind of a natural progression from sort of, glamish LA kind of metal to a little bit more heavy stuff. And that kind of led initially into being, by the time I was a teenager, being into death metal, checking on, getting into a lot of stuff like Cynic, Deicide, Cannibal Corpse, things like that. So I'd always buy a magazine called Metal Maniacs and read about the American and British metal bands and stuff that I liked. And that's where I was first exposed to hardcore. Really, I remember seeing a picture of Sick of It All. I remember reading a little bit about Madball when they first came out. So it would be heavier kind of hardcore stuff that they would cover in Metal Maniacs, but it was certainly, that was my gateway to getting into, American hardcore.
hmm So yeah, it seems like just having parents who had a really big musical background, it was like a no-brainer to be able to just go down the rabbit hole.
For sure.
Did a lot of those did a lot of those discoveries just come naturally, or like were more self-imposed versus like you had an old head, is what the kids call it, as far as someone being like, oh, you like this, you should actually listen to this stuff, or was a lot of that just like, I'm just grasping at anything that's coming my way?
I mean, just being raised by my folks, and to me, the best thing that you could be, was like David Bowie or Iggy Pop, like So as a kid, that's what I strived for, So I sought out music as well as had influences from older like skater kids, So first time I heard Metallica was Anastasia Pulling Teeth, and we're just like skating a launch ramp in South Edmonton, and my friend says, "Listen to this," and he literally pulls out his um, ghetto blaster, and puts in Anastasia Pulling Teeth, or bass solo, take one. That's the first memory of Metallica that I have.
Hmm.
Um, so there was influences like that, there's a radio station here in Edmonton, the university radio station called CJSR, that also I just heard about from other punk rock and skateboard kids, so I would stay up late Friday and Saturday nights, my friend Chris Kays and my little brother and I, and we would tape those radio shows, and that's where I first heard, Suicidal Tendencies. That's where I first heard Descendants, like just, SNFU, I always hear about SNFU a lot as an Edmonton kid, but
Mhm.
that's sort of where I first started to actually hear, the music itself. So yeah, being influenced by my folks and having music be such an important part of our household, it was natural for me to seek other stuff myself, or really admire music, and try and seek out as much of it as I could.
Yeah, it's very interesting because like good friends of mine up in Edmonton run like a show or have a show through CGSR now in 2022. So it's crazy to hear even like way back that like has still going on, and they play current hardcore, and it has stood the test of time, I guess. So that's really
Yeah,
interesting
which
that
is
that is still
amazing,
going.
right? Which is amazing considering how much things have changed in the media, right? But like for me
Totally,
back
totally.
then, that was my lifeline to American, punk rock and early American hardcore stuff. Like that was where I first heard about these things, because in Edmonton at that time there was no such thing, right? There was
Right.
a heavy metal scene and there was a punk rock scene, but very, very, very behind America for the most part.
Right. And even just like there's been lots of people of, my generation and even maybe a little bit older that discovered a lot of, the Slipknots and a lot of the new metal wave through MTV and through like seeing on the TV, and now like you
Right.
wouldn't even imagine if a Misery Signal, like it would be so weird to see a Misery Signals video in this day and age on the TV. And I wish that there was a bit of a comeback, but I do agree that, it was a time and place thing, and like, the world shifts and evolves and adapts. But I think discovering it through whether it's TV or radio, it still touches people and creates different seeds throughout.
I think too, like the radio piece is there's a mystique, right? There's a mystery, and that's all gone now from music, right? When I was a kid, I didn't know what suicidal tendencies looked like. Like I didn't know what Testament looked like, and
Mm.
that was there's something for a little for a young person. I think that mystery really it creates intrigue, or like you're very interested in them. It makes things very magical, right? So some of
Right.
that
Sure.
videos, computers, television, some of that that's taken away some of that mystery, some of that magic,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point as far as like when you just hear it off of like a, you're skateboarding with your friends and someone puts it on like a beatbox or like whatever it is. Like you're hearing it and you're only judging it off of what the actual
Right.
product
And you're
is.
like your
And you're
imagination
filling in
runs
the
wild.
gaps
And it's like, what do
yourself.
these guys
Totally.
look like? Like, it
Yeah.
can be a very
Yeah.
magical thing.
Yeah. On the other side, I do think that there are definitely certain things that are, now that we're just we're almost given all the information up front as far as, what the band looks like, what their logo looks like, how, like what they look like live and how they present themselves. That still resonates with a lot of people, because it's like, you know, certain bands are breaking different tropes. And the band that's coming to mind that talks a lot about when they were doing their debut, is a band from Australia called Speed. And,
Yep.
they when they were doing their demo cover, it's like we just want the five of us on the cover to be like, this is what we look like. So it's like kind of showing these, like, you hear the music and it's like this hard New York style, like hardcore that's just in your face, but then you see all these, like, majority of that band is all like Asian dudes, but it's like almost like a trope as far as like breaking that norm that, like, you wouldn't consider someone of Asian ethnicity to be a hard, I can just like write this dope breakdown music, if you know what I mean. So
Right.
it's an interesting balance. And, I've had members of that band on this podcast before to talk about that. And I think a that's just, you could look at so many different things of so many angles, but I do agree that there is some mystery when you just hear it versus you see everything.
Yeah. 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 That difference, that juxtaposition, I guess, of sometimes what a band looks like and then what they sound like can be such an amazing thing as well, right?
Right.
As a kid, I remember watching this club here called Starlight Room. I don't know if you've ever been. It used to be the Rev, and when I was a kid, it was the Bronx. I love a band called the Smalls from here. They were around kind of the same time as SNFU, very influential on me. And
Mhm.
I went to see them play one time, and they had a band from, I think, the Kamloops or Kelowna band called Spark Marker opening up. And the lead singer came out, and he just looked like a school teacher. And then as soon as they started, he just went so crazy, and it was, yeah, very, very influential and important kind of moment in my life, right?
Hmm.
Not to judge a book by its cover, and just a very cool thing.
Yeah. Like what kind of teacher? Like, he's not wearing like the gym, like he's not like he's got
He
a
just had like a
gym
polo, like a
shorts.
white polo on, right? And came up in like
Oh, okay.
slacks. Like he wasn't looking like,
I
in
came
that, at
straight
that
from
point.
work to the show kind of vibes.
Right, early
Yeah.
90s this is, right? So
Right.
everyone's very punk rock, grungy looking. He just looked very out of place. And I remember being up front and watching him and thinking like, oh, what's this about? This is different. This looks
Right.
crazy. And then, right, he went off harder than anybody
Everyone
with a
else.
shaved head or long hair or whatever, right? Like
Hmm.
it was cool.
Yeah. So you mentioned Edmonton, and it's uh I am walking into this interview after just watching the of Malice 10-year tour documentary that you guys did a number of years ago. And something that was interesting that I think you and Stu's been on the podcast before, is just talking about how when you guys both had joined Misery Signals initially, it was like almost like this like big thing for not only just Edmonton, but just like people within the neighboring cities and scenes to be able to be like, wow, like Jesse and Stu have joined this like huge band and are doing these big scale things. So like, can you talk to me about like the initial stages of the first time that happened, as well as like what was going on in your local scene? Like, were you playing in like bands locally before and then you just like springboarded into Mystics?
It's like, I mean, like I was saying before, Edmonton being, a smaller Canadian city in the prairies, there was not a real hardcore scene, right? When I was young coming up, there was a metal scene, a death metalish kind of scene, and there was a punk rock scene, and those scenes didn't really mesh very, very much.
Right.
As Compromise started, we would go to Calgary, and there was a bit more of a scene down there, I would say, because of Hoodie Hardcore Fest put on by Mike Zwazdecki, Soul Skater. That kind of crew, like him and his friends, X Wreck at X, like there was a bit of a hardcore scene down there. There was a straight edge band down there. Whereas in Edmonton, that didn't exist. There was, that didn't really happen yet. So as Compromise started, we would just play with punk rock bands. We would play with metal bands. We would play with whoever. We would try and tour into the States and out east, and in doing so we would be exposed to more and more of the hardcore culture, I guess.
Hmm.
um as Compromise pushed, and we just kind of created a scene here. Jordan was a very charismatic and influential person, so just very people naturally gravitated towards him, and I think that our band, benefited from that, just from his personality. So he definitely brought people together, and through those years, hardcore was just growing in Edmonton and Calgary and Vancouver, and there was it was a small scene in each of those cities, but there was a really strong connection between the kids. So we would go down to Calgary and play, or we would go down to Calgary to see shows. Calgary kids would come up here when we played. There was, I mean, it still exists. I think it's starting to exist again more so now. I think it was gone for a while, but yeah, it was just, I think like any really good scene, all it takes is like a couple good bands and a couple, really hardworking, dedicated people, and you can create something really, really wonderful. So
Hmm.
that's just what happened here, right? Is early 2000s, we didn't have any hardcore scene. Jordan started to go, his mother moved to Toronto. So that's kind of the spark of it, is that he would go to Toronto in the summer and he would go down to Hellfest. He would go down to Syracuse and he went to Hellfest a couple summers in a row. And then it was like, we're starting a hardcore band. This is what we're doing. We're gonna sound like Poison the Well and Shai Hulud. And for me, I was, like I said, more of a metal guy. So it was with a little bit of resistance, I guess, that he kind of drugged me along for a while. But
Sure.
pretty soon I saw the worth, I guess, in bands like Poison the Well, and the way that they could bridge the heavy and the light. And then I fell in love with that kind of stuff, and um, started to build the scene here. And then when I joined Seven Angels, that was yeah, very important to people in Western Canada, because it was sort of this hometown boy thing, going on to different, maybe bigger things, right?
Yeah.
um, which can be inspiring. I often say this about, the Smalls, and especially SNFU, right? As a kid growing up, it's one thing to, look at Metallica and Megadeth and all these bands, that are, far away, especially for us in the prairies, right? This is very, in the 80s, thinking about bands in Los Angeles, and these bands that I love are all from a very, very far away, different world. Whereas at SNFU were guys that look like more like me. They were Canadian guys. They were skateboarders, and they made it, maybe not big, but they proved to me early on that if you worked hard enough, even if you came from a small Canadian city, you could make a dent in the scene. And so, yeah, I hope that we inspired people in that same way.
Yeah, I think so. And I definitely want to echo what you said. Like, whether it's in Western Canada or any other like smaller scene that isn't as spoiled as, the Californias, the New Yorks, the Floridas, all those places. Like, all it takes is a couple really good bands that have those releases that go outside of, the initial sound barrier of your friends,
Yeah.
as well as like people that, do a fest, people that film shows, like people that are doing all the quote unquote extra things outside of that that help lift it all together. And I definitely feel that and then some when it comes to Calgary, whether it's Wild Rose, Hardcore Fest, to me, filming shows, to people starting record labels now. And, not even just in Calgary, but Edmonton as well, just has like just so many dope bands in varying degrees of genres right now. And I think it's just a net positive that all those things work together to like, you know, when people see different bands, then they're like, "Where's this band's from Edmonton? Where is that?" And then they have to like,
Right.
"Oh, this is not even in the States," and they're going down the rabbit hole. So
Yeah, I think I definitely see a rebirth of a hardcore scene here in the last couple of years, and that's it's a wonderful thing for this old guy to see.
absolutely, you're like, yeah, I think at a certain age, you're like, I'm happy to see this because like I've done my due diligence and I've done my fair share of work to play in bands and do all these things, and I'm still doing that. But like the heavy lifting and just inspiring nature needs to be done by the kids, by the people that are in their like early 20s, if not younger than that, to be able
Yep.
to take up that mantle for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're gonna fast forward a little bit to the latest Misery Signals release as far as the time of recording this episode, which is Ultraviolet. When Stu was on the podcast, which is maybe over a year at this point, we were still like peak pandemic, not really sure when things were coming out, and I think just a few singles had been released at that time.
Sure.
So, um, you know, it's it's a little annoying at times to be like you have to add COVID years to like all the aspects of it, because I think Stu had mentioned that there was things were ready to go even earlier than that, but it was like, okay, we have to kind of put it out even during this unknown time. So one thing that kind of stuck with me after our discussion is that he was saying for the first track, it was ultra important because Jesse was coming back to hear his voice like so early in the song, not like this 2 minute like little intro kind of thing. So talk to me about like the initial like, okay, I'm stepping into the mic booth again to do this with guys that I have, a very interesting history with. There's lots of good and bad and things in between. And we'll get into some of like the transparency stuff of the band. But talk to me about the original, like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm like recording, and we're gonna be putting this out in like X time. Talk to me about that.
I guess just a pretty intimidating time, that, in the fact that I had not done it for so long. So, um, after Misery Signals, I went to university and became a school teacher. Misery Signals was a band, Ryan and Kyle, Seven Angels, Seven Plagues was a band that us and Compromise really, really looked up to. So, the fact that I got to join that band was um, it was cool, because it was a band that I really liked. So I think we worked really hard in Misery Signals. I think of Malice and the Magnum Heart is a strong release. I think the strongest thing that I had been a part of up to that point. So to then try and come back and equal that was intimidating. As not intimidating, and just not something that I really thought I could even do. I questioned it, if we could match that. I remember thinking after Malice, like, lyrically, content wise, I had so much hardship and tragedy to draw upon, right? And that's why that record connects on so many levels, or one of the reasons that record connects on so many levels. So
Sure.
for a second release, you always hear about that sophomore jinx thing, and I just felt like, for us, oh, this is a real thing. Like, can I match what we've done?
Hmm.
Um, and so I didn't have to, obviously, with them kicking me out, I didn't have to do, try and match that right away. But that same doubt, those same questions, still existed, still arose when we started writing Ultraviolet. So um I just didn't do anything for so many years, because I didn't know that I could match Malice. I didn't know that I could match Misery Signals. And in fairness, when you're in university, I was so focused just on my studies and stuff, and that was fine for the first few years, because I was so focused on that. So I didn't miss the creative element of music. I didn't miss that outlet so much. Um, Surely, as the years went on in university, I started to feel it more, because I wasn't as busy with things. And then then I started teaching. And in my first few years of teaching, same thing. I didn't miss it so much. That hole was partially filled by just teaching and creating content, for my lessons.
Mm.
But I definitely started to miss that quite a bit. And um then the Malice X tour happened, and I just kind of, I did not sang heavy music for years and years. Like, it was a long, long time. And I was living in the middle of Saskatchewan, so I had nowhere to practice. I didn't have a band to practice with, and it was like, okay, we're just going to go, and we're not going to just go and play 6 or 7 songs. We're going to go and we're going to play this entire record front to back. Many of the songs too, we didn't really play all that much, in the initial version of the band. So it was intimidating to come back and do that Malice X thing. And then also, the geography issues of the band have always existed, and that also played a part. Like, I just didn't have a band to practice with. So um, we wrote that record in a very fragmented, strange manner, through
Right.
thanks to the internet, and just brief, times where we would get together, but it
Hmm.
was certainly a very, very vastly different experience from how we had written of Malice on the Magnum Heart, which was done, in my basement all together, like every single note's just basically written together, right from the
Yeah.
ground up. Ultraviolet is done very, very differently. So for me to come in and try to do what we had done 10 years prior or whatever was intimidating and hard. And I don't think my voice is all that great on Ultraviolet. I think it's stronger on Malice, and I think it's become stronger in the years since, just because, especially like in the last couple of years, because I've been doing Compromise, right? I have had Compromise to practice here in Edmonton with. Like
Sure.
Misery Signals has always been such a challenge for me because they live in America, right? So there's always been this issue with rehearsal and proper rehearsal.
Yeah.
Anyone in a band knows that you can practice in your room as hard as you want, right? And it's never going to equal even a rehearsal. And then you can practice as hard, as hard as you can at rehearsal, and it's never going to equal a show. So
Right.
the challenge
And
to
Misery Signals isn't a band that's like, okay, we got the fast part into the tom break, the build up, and then the breakdown. It's like it feels like there's so many. If Misery Signals to me feels like string theory at times. It's just like so much going on, and yeah, not having the luxury to you guys as far as like practicing on a regular basis is I don't know how you guys do it, but I understand the complexities there for sure.
yeah. So to come back and do it all those years later was scary and challenging, but we worked really hard, and I think we're all quite proud of what we did with Ultraviolet.
Mhm.
I don't think it's 10 out of a 10. I think in a lot of ways it's better than Malice. But I think if we did another one, I think we have one maybe better record in us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's that classic thing of always like, holding the first release or the demo on a pedestal and then everything else
Sure.
feels like, not as good. But there's definitely like certain songs, where I heard in other interviews where you said you were trying to, push the twins into being a little bit more like, rock structure as far as song goes versus like 17 riffs. So I appreciated that as like the more punk and hardcore person to be like, oh, I can understand, like we've come back to this part versus
Yeah.
like it just
I've
keeps
heard this
going and
part
going.
before. Yeah. There's
Exactly.
always been an interesting challenge, right? With like Stuart and myself, coming from more of a punk rock metal background, and Kyle as well. And then the brothers, right? Like their father is in the Madison Symphony Orchestra. So they just naturally
Which
come
Yeah,
by,
which as soon as
this.
I heard that I was like, that checks out because it feels like they're
Yeah, it
constructing
totally
a
makes sense.
symphony
Like
of
I'm at home
riffs.
listening. I'm at home listening to the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, right? And their dad's playing them Debussy and stuff like that. So it's just very vastly different upbringing of what you just heard as a little kid, right? And I think that definitely played into how we wrote music.
Yes, absolutely. So, I'll say because you weren't in the band for kind of right now we have the Jesse records are the bread of the Misery Signals discography sandwich. So, focusing on of Malice and Ultraviolet, I always like so I'm going to ask you this question, and usually I include the entire discography, and you can throw in the rest of this if you really want to. But if we were only looking at the Jesse Misery Signals records, what, in your opinion, is the most overrated song of those two records, and what is the most underrated song of those two records?
Holy smokes. Um, like people love 5 years, and I just don't think that it's equal to other stuff on that record. Lyrically, for me, it's a little bit goofy. It's a little bit immature. It's a little bit yucky. I don't like singing it. So for me, I guess lyrical content, yeah, I don't love 5 years, but
Right.
people love that. Like, especially, I don't know, on the East Coast and stuff, like in New York and places like that, like 5 years is absolutely loved.
Hmm.
So for me, that would be the one that I think is kind of overrated. But the end riff, like the Morgan, like diddly 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 doo, that's amazing. So it's hard to you can't
Right.
uncouple the two or whatever.
Right.
Um, I don't think that there's anything on Ultraviolet that I'm displeased with, or I'm unhappy with, or I think is overrated. Uh, I think A Certain Death is quite overrated, which is like one of their big hits.
Right.
I wasn't there. They always want to play that one. I don't really like that one. The singy part at the end to me has always been a little bit whatever. I don't love that part, so yeah, it's
Well, you didn't write it, so it's, exactly
not one of my
that
favorite
checks out.
parts.
Yeah, as far as underrated for either of those two records, does anything come to mind for those?
No, I think the band is um enjoyed, respected, and enough. I
Okay.
think yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and
fine. It's
it's
good.
interesting because you as the vocalist are looking at it from a lyrical and connecting on that. Where if I ask Stu, like he might look at it at a little bit more of like, I think this song does like we put so many good riffs into this song and then it never got the love on that side, or like I feel like I'm just kind of doing the same chord thing for the entirety of this song. So, that's
Yeah, I don't love the Tempest, I guess. And that's Stewart's like baby. That's one of the ones Stewart really just latched onto early on in the writing sessions. And so he wanted that to be the first song on the record, and like he wanted that to be the video. And yeah, so that one I would say, in
okay.
my opinion, is overrated. Is the Tempest. Some Dreams is one that I really like off Ultraviolet that we don't really play. Old Ghosts I really like. And same thing, we just never really have included it into the set yet. But
Hmm.
who knows
Okay.
what will happen in the future?
Who knows?
That's right.
Sometimes I like the serendipity that maybe if we talk about something being underrated, the people listening to this are like, "Oh, I need to go extra hard if Mr. Signals is playing that song
That's right.
in my town." So going back a little bit now to when you guys were doing the Of Malice 10-year reunion tour, something that was interesting, and we'll get to the doc in a little bit, but something that was interesting there is like when I was, hearing the stuff on the documentary, it seemed very much like this is the one and only time that we're doing it with the OG lineup. When and at what point did that change where it's like, okay, we can do another record and we can kind of do that? Like what was the last domino that started a new chapter for you guys?
Misery Signals is such a weird band, and I think that if you asked each of us this question, you might get 5 different answers.
Mm.
Um, so for me, like coming back and like the door just kind of creaked open a little bit, right? When they said, "Hey, let's go do this thing." So to me, right off the bat, it's like, the possibilities are endless. Like, yeah, we can go do this amazing tour. Things are going to be great. We're going to write another record. Everything's going to be fine. But you also have to keep in mind that at that time, I'm like just in my first few years of teaching too. So it's kind of like, do I want to jump back into this thing? Because I know it's all encompassing. I know like how important it is to put your whole self into it, right? And I'm just
Mhm.
kind of starting my teaching career at the same time. So that was challenging. I just lost my train of thought.
You were mentioning that this answer to this question might be different for every person in the band.
All right. So,
Yeah.
by that tour is going well. And as anyone who has watched Yesterday Was Everything, the documentary, sees that there's obviously an internal struggle within the band, right? And maybe some of us are more obviously early on being like, hey, this is a great thing, let's keep doing this. And then some
Mhm.
other people are more resistant to it. I think basically like in the film, it's more kind of Ryan and I, right? But there's more to it than that film shows, certainly. Rye, I think, was resistant to even having me come back at all in the beginning. I think maybe things had played themselves out in a similar manner, with Carl as they had with myself. I think that whether I'd come back or not for Malice X, I don't know that they would have continued on anyways with Carl. Things were not in a good space. So for me, I was just like, let's do this and let's do Malice X. That's fantastic. If there's further opportunities down the road, I'm pretty open to them because I really miss playing in this band and I really miss playing heavy metal and stuff. So as that tour went on and the shows were just like great show after great show, and more importantly, I think, you know, the connections that you make in the hardcore scene. You know, a lot of these people that I'd become friends with, I didn't see for 10 years or something, right? So all of a sudden, you know, you're in Milwaukee and you're seeing all these people that, because the guys lived there, right? I'd spent so much time in the States. That tour was just amazing. You know, I got to see so many great people and play all these great shows. And it was, I think, as much as Ryan wanted to just say that was it, we're going to walk away, I think, you know, it was nearly impossible to do. I think with myself and the other four, you know, or other three just pushing to continue on, I think we kind of broke through his armor eventually,
Sure.
and not at the end, like on the Yesterday Was Everything, right? Like that, though, that tour is broken into two chunks. So we do a summer bit where we
Mhm.
end in Toronto, right? There's two amazing shows at Gramercy Theater in New York, and then at escaping me now, Opera House in Toronto.
Mhm.
That's the final show, but we know that there's going to probably be a couple more. We're not certain, but like, you know, on the video, I say this might be the last time we ever play these songs together. And like, I'm kind of like choking up literally because we're not certain that we're going to do these other shows. But that was all West or East Coast kind of stuff, right? And then there's kind of the plan to maybe do some West Coast stuff as well. So
Mhm.
by the end of that New York, by the end of the East Coast stuff, it doesn't look like we're going to continue on. Like there's been no real big change of heart from what I see between Ryan and I. There's been no huge talks or anything. So it's like, okay, maybe this is it. Like it's been cool, but maybe this is the end of it.
Right.
Um, in the months in between, like by September, I think Kyle, who's basically kind of the band manager, the guy who does a lot of that stuff for us, he starts to look into doing like a couple California shows, maybe a Texas show. And he does book those. So those happen over December, my Christmas break of that year. And it's that final show in Dallas where we play in Deep Ellum, this area where we used to play, which is like, you know, White Ave of Edmonton or something, like just the main strip.
Mm.
Um, and we go to, you know, this is places where we had been, you know, places where we had spent a lot of time together. And we go to this little pizza shop where we used to eat when we were kids next to Trees, this other club that we used to always play. And the brothers are sitting down eating some pizza. And I remember walking in there and like, it's the last show, everything's done. Like, this is Dallas, this is the final show of the whole run. And I just said to Ryan, I said, you know, if you guys can't get things together with Carl, I sure would be happy to come back and try and do something again.
Mm.
So I think that was the, the spark, I guess, of things, right? And I said, even if we just write some songs, it doesn't have to be Misery Signals. Maybe it's just we just write some songs. And so when I got back to Canada that time, I sent him a few riffs, and what that song eventually became was a song called Morphine, which eventually became Some Dreams. So Some Dreams is really the first kind of thing we started to write. Um, but again, because like it's not an easy band to be in, and I don't think I really knew that I was back in the band until maybe 2 years after that.
Hmm.
So there's, you know, like there's just this very gray area of like, okay, we're gonna play some shows, okay, maybe we're gonna write some songs together, but it was just like Ryan and I exchanging riffs and ideas, right?
Mhm.
I'm in the middle of the prairies, like in the middle of Saskatchewan at that point. So it's just a very gradual a very gradual growth. It just took some time.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think like an overall theme that I see with Misery Signals, and this kind of like goes into the documentary, is that like the transparency of the band and like anyone that's like maybe tuning in and doesn't know like a lot of the other members of Misery Signals, like, and is like, wow, like just is being very upfront about all these things that are going on, but like that is kind of shown in the documentary, and then some with like the rest of the guys. And like obviously it's like you're not just having someone just come along on this tour, and you all like looked at the documentary before you greenlit it to go to a worldwide audience. But like, has that neat is was the way of like being transparent about the good and the ugly of this band like something that just like needed to happen, or was it just like was it just so easy between members just to be upfront about it in a public setting. Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I don't love every element of that movie, and I don't know that that movie would what wouldn't have come out the same if we did it now. It's
Mm,
just like I was very vulnerable at that point. Like that movie also was made by Matt Mixon, who is Ryan's best friend, like his childhood friend. So um there's choices that Matthew made in his in his as he laid that film out, that he tells a story.
right.
And he chose what story he wanted to focus on, what elements he wanted to focus on. I think at times that film doesn't focus on um, some of the things I wish it did. I wish it told more of the story of compromise. I think at time it's kind of like reality TV, like it's a little over dramatic at times,
Hmm.
but it's effective. And it's, I'm not saying it's not true, because it is true. It's like any film. There's just choices that were made by Matthew to make it um, to tell the story that he wanted to tell. I just think
Hmm.
that if it was maybe my best friend that was making that film, it might have turned out a little bit different. And because I was still at that point not back in the band, like I'm like kind of trying to get back in the band, I didn't pick it apart, and I didn't really see it until it was basically done. And I did raise some concerns with Matthew and stuff about it, but we just had a band meeting about it, and um, it as hard as that film is for me to watch and for some people to watch, I guess that's maybe what makes it so good. It is very truthful. It's very, very hard. It's a hard thing for me to be a part of,
Hmm.
hard thing for me to watch the first time. And I think I've only watched it one time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think like you've talked about this on other interviews that I was listening to today, where you were like, I don't think anyone in that band like comes out of that documentary looking shinier or anything like that. But I do feel like there was maybe a bit more of like antagonizing you specifically to a degree. And like I do think that there are a lot of good things about the documentary as far as like even just like the quality level as a filmmaker myself, like the fact that it wasn't just like over crazy production. It was like kind of very it felt like a hardcore documentary for like a metalcore band. So there's some pros there, but I definitely felt like, the biases were maybe a little bit more apparent as far as the person making that. But um it was watching it today, it just and I highly recommend like if people do have access to be able to check it out, I feel like there is some stuff to take away from because there was definitely some moments in the, compromise Seven Angels, Mr. Signals kind of combined story that just like really, moved me. Just like it was really raw just to see
Yeah.
some of those like really you know the interviews and some of the footage of all the things that transpired there. So, yeah, like I don't know, it's definitely hard when you are handing your creative IP to someone else that you don't necessarily 100% align with, and but I do think it's worth giving you guys kudos to be able to put that out so people could hear the story about like everything that happened in Compromise and how that was connected to the other bands that you were a part of.
Yeah. It's a heavy thing. Like it's well done. He did a fantastic job with it. It's just for myself a weird thing to be a part of, right?
So this is more of a general question, but like how when did, the shortening of misery signals to Ms. Sigs, when did that start to hit your radar when you were in the band? Or was that post when you left initially?
No, I think that that's something that we just said lots ourselves, like
Mhm.
just as uh yeah, just slang that we just kind of said. I think I don't recall like the first time I heard it.
Mhm. I it was when I was like first getting, into you guys, it was like, oh yeah, I love Miss Sigs, and they would like catch me off guard at first. I'm like, whoa, what is that?
What the
So I
hell's
don't know if
that?
yeah, but it's funny to see now that like it's just so second nature for you.
Totally.
Do
Yeah.
you find that like majority of Misery Signals fans or Miss Sigs fans today are people that are fans from like the very first records, or like what percentage do you think of like people that are like newer fans that like just discovered ultraviolet in the midst of the pandemic? Like what do you think is like the average like age range, or just like showgoer for one of your shows?
I'm like, grown men nowadays, basically like large bearded men. Like I always say, like, oh, the kids tonight were this or the kids tonight were that, and it's like, oh no, like the large grown men is what I should
Yeah.
be saying. Um, I think that thanks to us staying active and thanks to bands like Counterparts and Brandon and stuff talking about us, there's still young people that come out to the shows, right? People,
Hmm.
young metalcore kids understand who we are. But it's generally older guys, right? It's generally, people in their 30s and 40s that are coming to see Misery Signals these days.
Hmm. So I love that you brought up Brendan, friend of the show. He's been on twice now. We're scheduling a third, and I feel like that's a good transition into this other thing. So the last time that Brendan Murphy was on the podcast, we talked about Furnace Fest 2021, where
Hmm.
Misery Signals couldn't play. So there was kind of a stitching together of other members of past and present Misery Signals, as well as Counterparts and Comeback Kid and everything in between.
Yeah,
Um,
I allude.
and Shai Halud as well. Yeah, thank you for adding that. So, can you just tell your side of the story on that end? Because in Brendan's episode, he kind of mentions like, because he's like, these are his words. He was like, I think your summer ended in June is like one of the best metalcore songs of all time. So it felt like, am I allowed to sing this song? So talk to me about like your side when you're just getting the texts and the calls from him when this is happening.
So I couldn't go because of COVID. And this is a festival, like the very first show that I ever play with Seven Angels where I'm just singing, is at Furnace Fest. It's at Furnace Fest 2003,
Oh, okay.
2002. So it's only a few months after the crash, and the crash is, the last show Compromise ever plays is in Birmingham, Alabama.
Mm.
Furnace Fest is in Birmingham, Alabama. So the last show Compromise ever plays is in that city. The first show that I ever played with Seven Angels is in that city a few months later. That place just holds a special place in my heart and the hearts of the band, I guess. For myself, right when I joined Seven Angels, we're playing that festival, and I'm playing that festival alongside, Code 7 and Hatebreed and all these bands that, I really looked up to as a younger guy. So um, it's a special place for myself. I love elements of Southern America. And that venue itself specifically is really, really, really neat. It's a very interesting place. It's an old iron plant. So it's unlike any other venue that I've ever played in my life. So
Totally.
very, very cool place. And then for them to have been able to resurrect that fest and ask us to come back, super excited about it. And then the fact that it was put off by COVID for 2 years, um, it just built up the anticipation, and then
Totally.
all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is going to happen, and I can't go. I can't go. And again, that rehearsal bit, like I'm kind of glad that we didn't at that point, because we were so unpracticed. Like we hadn't played together in literally years at that point, over a year.
Right.
So for us to have gone and played Furnace Fest last year would have been a huge challenge, and I just don't know that we would have delivered on the level that we like to deliver. So
Right.
um it was hard, and it was like literally one of the hardest weekends of my life. Like I'm stuck here, people are posting all this stuff on Instagram and Facebook, friends are showing
FOMO is at
and
all
all
time
these songs,
max.
like killer, like the worst of my life probably, right? Like
Yeah.
what am I doing? And then that day Stuart messaged me and said, like, hey, we have this idea, what do you think about this? I said, oh, that's good. That'd be wonderful. Like that's an
Yeah.
honor. I'd be honored. That's fantastic. Um, and then Brendan messaged me being like, hey, like, is this okay if I do this? And like, of course it's okay to me. I understand, like, it's the year summer ended in June, so it's like this special song, but if there ever was a group of people to play that song, and if there ever was a venue and a time to do that, that was it. So like, I was 100% all for it, just super bummed that I couldn't be there to witness it. So one of my friends, Laura, who used to play bass in The Wage of Sin, which is a band that we used to play with when we were young, she like live Facebook messaged me the whole thing. So like I was watching it, like I was tearing up watching them play that song there and just being like, I'm stuck here in Canada. My God. So it was really cool. I'm really, really happy that they were able to get it together, and I think they did a really great job with it.
Yeah. So now fast forward to this year, Furnace Fest 2022, then everything kind of connects finally. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. I was saying how like you may be looking back and being like, oh yeah, we needed more time on the, just get practice up in season. Did all that anticipation that was building for you pay off for this year?
Yeah, it was just absolutely magical, just a wonderful time. The weather was fantastic. Got to see so many people again, like that I'd not I got to share time with for many, many years. So just really, really great. And our set was everything that I had hoped it would be. So super thankful that we were able to be a part of that, that I was able to get to go. And like, we played the exact same stage that I played when I was a kid with Seven Angels, so it was pretty special, pretty amazing thing. And it did work out for us in the fact that we were practiced, right? Like, this year has been for a bunch of dads and dudes that are busy with other things. Like, we've been pretty busy this year. We played a lot of shows. So, as far as, for us, we were as pretty much as practiced as we could be. So it was a good time for us to play.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, yeah, that's crazy to just think about the return of a lot of shows because, as you know, being a Canadian, like things in the States came back way sooner than up here in Canada
Right.
because just restrictions were just through the yin yang. But yeah, Misery Signals did play a lot. Like the Western Canada Cancer Bats and Comeback Kid Run was just like maybe quantity of shows was like the most, but then even for you guys to do the little run in Eastern Canada with End and Trench, and then playing things like This Is Hardcore, like, is is that is that amount of shows like the the perfect balance for what you have going on in your life right now, or is it like let's go down just a little bit, or let's increase it a little bit more?
That was doable for me, right? And like, I think that we have to be conscious of the fact that we are, in our 40s, and like an athlete, you can only do this well for so long, right? And I think you have to accept that. And we're perfectionists. We really care about the art that we put out there, and I think that there's, a shelf life for us. So I think we're at a good point right now. We're able to perform still, but I think that there's probably a time where we're not going to be able to do that so well anymore. So
Hmm.
take advantage now, kind of carpe diem kind of thing, like seize the day, because I think that, in a couple more years, like, I just probably won't be able to do it at the level that I want to be able to do it at. So let's tour as much as we can now, and enjoy it while we can.
Hmm. Like, I'm sure that there's certain blackout times or like, things within, your teaching schedule that you're like, I just can't be out at this time. But like, is there anything within when you work as a teacher where you can like request a book time off for a tour, or is it just like I have these breaks that the kids are not in school and that's my touring schedule?
So definitely, yeah. I mean, I definitely have like summer, Christmas break, spring break, and then other long weekends here and there. And that's essentially what we just kind of use this year. Like, we just
Right.
use all of my breaks. We toured as much as we can. Um, Last year and the year before, I was working in this outreach center with high school kids. So I wasn't lecturing, right? I didn't have like a traditional 4 blocks a day that I had to teach. So there was a lot more leeway.
Hmm.
And my principal, all my principals over the last decade have been super supportive, so that's not really an issue. But
Mm.
um, I started a new uh, job this year where I'm running a grade 9 and 8 classroom for kids that are seeking alternative programming, similar to what I did with the high school kids, but because they're under 16, they have to be in the desks, they have to be there each day. So
Mm.
I have to be right in the classroom teaching them. And a lot of my kids are kind of like coming from at-risk scenarios. So this year I wouldn't want to leave them. Last year it was, I could do it and took advantage of that scenario. But this year my teaching job um, is a little bit more demanding, and yeah, I won't leave this year as much as I left last year, just because it's important to me to be here for the kids.
Totally. Um, and I've said this on the podcast before. It's like I've probably learned more applicable skills into how I carry myself in the world, how I approach like, job interviews or like just different things that I've learned from doing DIY or doing hardcore. So when
Right.
it comes to you, what is like the one and most applicable thing that you just catch yourself like, oh, I wouldn't have known this if I didn't play in bands and toured around the world. But I am doing this and applying this in my classroom every single day. Does anything come to mind there?
I mean, nothing specific, but I just mean like being an English teacher, I can very commonly talk about, you know, settings and environments, places where the literature's set, where I've literally been, right? Like, we're reading To Kill a Mockingbird. Well, I spent a lot of time down in the South. I can connect to that, and kind of that helps me, I think, to teach the kids on that level, the amount of travel that I've done. So, and that also obviously connects to social studies. So I just think the amount of traveling that you do playing in bands is going to be uh, I mean, it's going to make you a more intelligent, more rounded person, whatever career you're involved in, right?
Hmm. Are there any road stories that you've told a kid and then they're like, that sounds too crazy. I don't believe you?
Yeah, no, nothing that I can think of off the top of my head. Not really. I mean,
Yeah, Mr. Z is pretty trustworthy. They're like, yeah, yeah, he's done some crazy stuff.
yeah, and I mean, as Mr. Z too, there's certain things that I can't, share
Yeah,
so
you
much
can't.
or talk
Yeah,
about.
there's certain misery signal show stories that
There's
probably
only
should
a
not be told.
yeah, there's a
We were at the
certain version.
show and
There's
people
just a
got
certain
beat up.
version of me that they get there.
Yes, yeah, it's like there's many filters on that before.
That's right.
Also, do people say Mr. Z or Mr. Z?
Z generally.
Okay.
I've only had a handful of kids through the years that say Zed. Like in my current situation, we're first names, so they call me Jesse. Most of them.
Oh, okay.
Some kids they can't get away from the Mister thing, so they still be Mister Zaraska or Mister Z.
Hmm.
But yeah, if it's Mister Z, which is the most common, yeah, only a few have said Mister Zed through the years,
Is that a
which is
like
odd, right? But
Yeah, totally. And I think it's odd that you're on a first name basis because I would get in trouble when I was in middle school and high school to
yeah,
call my teacher by their first name.
for sure. So that just speaks to the environment, the place that I work. So where I work, it's kids that have been maybe have anxiety issues, maybe have bullying issues from other schools, maybe have been expelled from other schools, or they are seeking alternative programming because they're super involved in like theater or sports or something like that. But generally, they have not all had the best school experience in the past.
Sure.
So we want to make it as welcoming and relaxed as possible. So the first
Mhm.
name thing is just kind of one of the things that we do to make them feel more chill. Um, yeah, it doesn't bother me. I know there's certainly some teachers that don't like it. They want to be Mr. or Mrs., but it's never bothered me
You're
whether
like,
they
chill
call me
out, Steve. Chill out,
Jesse or Mr.
Mary.
Z or whatever.
um, Going back a little bit, you were mentioning just on Misery Signals about like you guys really care about the art that you make, and something that you said in the documentary that kind of like hit me is that it was like um I wrote down the quote. It was like, "We were focused on the art at all costs." And as someone who is, when I have like my own project, I definitely am a perfectionist. I get very like crazy about the details. Um, so maybe because you're in your 40s now, what would be the one thing that you would say to, 18, 19, 20-year-old Jesse when, your first in misery signals, as far as like something to remind yourself of, like, doing the art does matter, but dot dot dot.
But in order to continue to do the art, you have to consider longevity, you have to consider health, you have to consider, taking care of yourself and each other. So for us, it was just go, 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 go. We're going to take over the world. We're going to release as much music as we can. We're going to tour and play as many shows each year as we can. And it burned us out. And it's just like, as much as we all love music and love what we've done, like, it killed us, right? Like, and we're lucky that we were able to come back years later and kind of figure it out and realize that, it wasn't because we were all super hard to deal with. It was just that we were in a very extreme situation. I had come from a great amount of trauma and tragedy, and we just like pushed ourselves too hard at too young of an age.
How do you, while you're on tour now, have moments of, peace or time just for yourself to like reset things on your end?
There's just so many different things, I think, especially as a singer, that you recognize, that you realize as the years go on, that you have to do in order to maintain your health and your ability to sing. So sleep, it's just sleep is the number one thing, right? Like, so whatever you have to do, whatever tricks you have to pull to make sure that you're getting enough sleep, you have to do that. And in a van tour or a bus tour, those can be very different things. So what tricks you employ are going to be different dependent on that specific scenario.
Hmm.
um
Do you
so
nap?
yeah, I think you really do. I nap?
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely, I would in the past when we were on van tours, because I'd have the loft, I would. And back then when we were young, especially, like, you're there till 3 or 4 in the morning, loading out, doing all that. You get to the hotel, and maybe you're at the hotel from like 4 or 5 a.m. until 10 or 11, right? So there's only a, 5 or 6 hour chunk there where you can get sleep in a bed. That's not going to do it, right? So
Right.
we would all definitely sleep in the van, then on the drives, during the mornings, during the early afternoon. So
Hmm.
that was important. On a bus tour, you can do that more. Um, and just really, maintaining general health, right? So making sure that you're eating right. For me, it's my diet's a huge thing. I can't eat a whole bunch in the day like the other guys. So I eat very light. Like, I eat like a banana and an apple and an orange in the morning, and then, a reasonable lunch. But I won't eat dinner. Maybe a small salad, if we're playing late enough. But
Yeah.
I generally don't really eat dinner until after we play. So yeah, just making sure that you are not living off fast food, making sure that you are getting enough rest, and then, taking just good breaks. Like, I found myself when I was young, I wouldn't make it happen. But now, like, I'll go to a museum, I'll go to, some parks. For me now as a teacher, right? Like, I have specific locations a lot of the time, like, oh, I want to go check this out because it's in this book, or I want to go check this
Mm.
out because it's from this part of World War II or whatever, right? Like,
Right. Right.
so I've made much more conscious effort of doing that kind of stuff while we're on tour. So it's not just boom, 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 like, you just, play a show, go to sleep, drive, play a show, go to sleep, drive. Like,
Right.
I try to add in a little bit more wealth in my days.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love the idea of being in your classroom and then being like, oh, Mr. Z's back from tour, and you have like, oh, I went to go visit this monument or like whatever that's applicable to, I love the connection between those two worlds.
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned that normally you won't eat until after your set. What's a perfect post set Jesse meal, of your choosing? Someone's someone's taking you to dinner after a Major Signal set. What are you after?
So I mean, it depends. If we're playing a show the next day, then I still have to be conscious of like what I'm eating. So I eat a lot of sushi, a lot of like Asian food, I guess, when I'm on tour.
Okay.
Lots, like tons of salads, tons of fruit. But I'm also like a meat and potatoes guy, right? So if it was like the end of tour and I was like, it was the last show and we're gonna go for a big meal, like, I'd like a big like keg meal, or like, steak and potatoes, like, yeah.
So Mr. Signals might be at some local keg at the very end of any tour.
Well, just myself probably. The others would,
just
the
just
others
drop me
would be
off
at like
here.
Padmanati or some vegan place. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll Uber back to the hotel, but just leave me here for the next couple of hours. Oh,
Which was
that's really funny.
challenging, right? Like when we were young too, that was another thing. Like we would fight a lot about that kind of stuff because it was three vegans, two meat eating Canadians, and like we've certainly learned how to deal with our diets much
Mhm.
better over time. But when we were kids, there was a lot of fighting about that too.
Yeah, it's funny. Endgame originally, for the longest time, only the drummer of our band was a meat eater, and then it was like I primarily eat vegetarian, and then we had two vegans,
Right.
and just off of certain events have transpired, and now there's three meat eaters in the band and one vegan. So now we're
Right.
just being like, "Yo, Dan, eat a Big Mac," and he's like, "No."
Yeah, it's changed through the years. Like Brandon, our drummer, is the only one who has stayed vegan. Is he's been vegan since he was 15 or 16 years old. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
But when I joined that band, right, when I joined Seven Angels, those guys are all like Christian straight edge vegans, and I'm this Canadian meat eating, very different lifestyles.
Yeah, just the opposite.
Yeah.
That's so funny. So uh we were talking, it's like, sorry. Sometimes when you talk about food on a podcast, it kind of derails it and I kind of get off the tracks of
That's all right, man.
where we were.
Gather
Um
yourself.
gather myself. I am thinking about the lack of food in my stomach right now, but I think I should think about my post podcast meal after this for sure. So maybe we could just talk about like compromise specifically. Because that band, I think a lot of the things as far as like the accident and some of those things that are concerned are like a lot of those things are covered in the documentary, and it's up to you if like how much like we would hit on for this interview. But I think the craziest thing is not being a local Alberta person, because I moved here like 6 or 7 years ago. When it was announced that Compromise was coming back to do shows, there was like I could feel the excitement from all the people that I know that are born and raised here. So y- so before we even get to like the new music that you guys are starting to put out, like was that even did that even hit your radar of like, oh, this band might do something, cuz it's been like 20 years kind of in between those things.
Yeah. It was never anything that we considered. And I don't think because it was we were against it, is just the reality of how our lives, the paths that our lives have taken. Myself being so involved with Misery Signals and then getting into teaching. Ryan, our drummer, played in a band called Savannah from here and toured and toured and toured, and then joined SNFU for a bit. Eventually made his way down to LA where he lives now, and he just made a life down there for himself. So we were just never together, right? For so many years. We would just see each other at Christmas. We would see each other, when Ryan got back here in between tours or came home for visits. Stayed super close and everything, but just lived in different cities. So the idea of Compromise ever writing or doing anything of worth was just never was seemed like a reality.
Mhm.
COVID though changed that. Ryan had to come home for an extended period of time, and we just started jamming. And we had done that previously, like once in a while, like, oh, we're all home for Christmas, like let's get together and play some songs.
Hmm.
Kind of crafting, like piece together a couple Compromise songs and some Sick of It All or Madball songs or whatever, like that kind of thing we had done, just jamming for fun here and there. But Ryan being back for a while allowed us to do that a number of times in a row. And then that just sort of led to, people jamming riffs, like just very organic, just very naturally, like us all being together. And Levi just starts playing a riff and Junior just starts playing drums to that riff. And over a few months of that happening, it was like, oh, like we're kind of writing songs again and it's all of us. And could this be compromised? Should this be compromised? And then those questions, start to come about. And it's like with the way Compromise ended, it was also Jordan was just such a huge part of that band. It never really came into our minds to think that we would do it without him.
Mm.
Um, so we always just walked away from it. But it's just such an unfair thing, right? That band was taken away from us. Everything, we lost our best friends, our guitar players, and we also lost like years and years and years of work that we had put into that band, right? You know what it takes to get a band off the ground and to make a name for yourself. So that was all just gone. And good or bad, I see it now. I look back now, and I think it's not so good that Junior and I just got right back into touring. I don't think that it was mentally, emotionally a healthy thing to do, to get right back into touring to the extent that he and I did. But we just, we're just super focused on doing our new projects, and never thought about doing Compromise again. And then COVID allowed us some time to get back together and start writing some music. So we thought, this is cool. Let's keep doing this, and we have.
So as far as the time of recording this, you guys have put out one single, which I watched the music video today, and I think I can't remember if it was you posting or maybe just off of the band, but essentially the music video is kind of like a dedication to Jordan. And it's Dan. Is it Daniel?
Daniel.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of a dedication to those two guys. Um, how did crafting a video, because like a lot of that is shot in Finland, I'm pretty sure. So like, how did
Holland,
that
yeah.
the creation of that, was it like we shot our parts here and then the director did everything else and we kind of like stitched it together? Like, talk to me about that.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing. So a fella named Morgan Ted, who lives in the UK, he did the Tempest video. He also helped us with the Sunlifter one. So Misery Signals released 3 videos for that last record, Ultraviolet.
Hmm.
Morgan Ted helped us with the first and the third. He's just super talented, super awesome, kind guy that I've kept in touch with. And when Compromise started talking about doing a video, it was just kind of a no-brainer to get in touch with him. And because he lives so far away, it is this different scenario. And same thing we did with Sunlifter, right? It was like we sent him some live stuff that we recorded with Ryan's cousin. He mixed it in with other stuff that he did out there. This time him and I just kind of talked about the general idea. He came up with this idea. He said he would go to this place called Snowdonia in Wales, which is like, it looks like Jasper or Banff. It's just a very magical mountainous place.
Totally. Yeah.
He came up with this general idea, and the rest of us thought that was fantastic. At first, there's a version of it where we're not in it, and we just wondered if, after being gone for so long, was it important for them to see us? Kind of getting back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the interview, right? Like, part of me was like, no, the mystery, the mystique is awesome when you don't see us. But then there's also like, no, people do want to see you, especially a band, that's come back after so long. So then we decided that we would mix some clips in. So we had our friend Brad here, just do some stuff of us in a very similar fashion to how Misery Signals did this live in isolation thing that we did during COVID. So
Yes.
we just very like black background, very like one light above me. Very simple, but very
Still a
effective.
little bit mystique there.
Yeah. And so in the end, we decided that we would employ those things. We mixed those clips in. So we just sent those out to him over in the UK. He mixed them in and sent us back that final product, and just super happy with how that all turned out. Really happy with the song, happy with all of us being able to get back together and do it, and happy with the finished product that Morgan was able to deliver, because it's very pro looking, very cool looking. So it's nice.
Yeah, it definitely is. It has that pro feel, and yeah, I wasn't aware of the Misery Signals connection there to those music videos, but that totally checks out because those videos on its own are high def. But I think just the storytelling aspect, like I think that's a huge piece of that, where it's like I could continually watch that and it still has that like emotion, and that's I don't know. I felt connected to it when I was watching it because it made
Awesome.
me think about all the people that I've unfortunately lost, either through the music scene or other things, and always feeling like they pop up and are with you in different scenarios in your life. So I just want to applaud you on that creative art on top of the music itself. Um, so it's only been one song out. So what
Right.
is on the horizon for Compromise thus far that you can talk about?
There's no secrets. It's just like, again, Ryan Ryan lives in Los Angeles. So we did a couple shows here. We recorded 4 songs, and the hope is that when he comes back here, hopefully at Christmas or maybe in the new year, we write some more songs and hopefully just get a record out within the next year. So that's the goal, is to, write 9 or 10 songs and then release those. So 4 of them are done, 4 of them are already recorded. We probably will release another one here in the next few months.
Okay.
Just kind of very, very loose plans, because Junior had to go back to LA to focus on his his day job, I guess.
Right.
And I started this new job right this year, and so it's just kind of been there's no grand plan. We're just kind of taking it as it comes and doing the best as we can.
Right. And on a similar token, since we're heading a little bit towards the close, Ultraviolet is almost 2 years because it was August 2020. So a year and a half, I will say. So I'm sure that there's thoughts or some initial work that's being considered for new Misery Signals stuff. I'm sure that's more of like that stuff. It might be a little closer to the chest, but anything you want to say to what's future wise for Ms. Sigs?
Uh, I'm not certain about the future of Misery Signals. Unfortunately, I don't know that. I hope that we have another record in us. There's not been a lot of movement in that direction, so I question that if we'll be able to do it. It took us last time 5 years to write that record. As I said, it's very important for us to put out stuff that we believe in. And when we were kids, that was all we focused on, was just music. Now, we put a lot of time into Ultraviolet. It was just that it had to be done over sort of a 4 or 5 year period. In order for us to write another record that strong, we would need a few more years. And there's been not a lot of movement in that direction. So I'm not certain that Ms. Biggs is going to be able to do it, but we'll see. I don't know what the future holds.
Yeah. And I hope the future doesn't hold another global pandemic that makes it maybe like, oh, everyone has all this free time to write new music. But I do. It is exciting to, see the return and, seeing more touring for Misery Signals, as well as just like all those things. And this has been a really great chat, Jesse. One more question before we wrap up. I always ask every guest that comes on the show a favorite mosh related story to end the episode. So that's a gruesome, wholesome, something that happened to you, something that you did, or just happened at a random show that you were at. Whatever is the first thing to your head.
I guess I'll have 2. So
Okay.
when we were young, touring, as I said, going out to the East Coast and stuff, we would see a lot of hardcore culture for the first time out there. One time we were with the Full Blast, and we went to a place in Philadelphia called the Kill Time, which was run by Bob Meadows, who's the singer from Life Once Lost. Back then, he wasn't the singer in Life Once Lost. He was just a dude named Robert that ran this club. This club was like just a hole in the wall, and we went and watched. We played there. No, we played the night before, and then the next night we stayed and went and watched End. Or The End from Toronto, not End, but The End.
Okay.
And who
from
that
Toronto?
Is? Yeah.
Interesting.
Sick
Okay.
band, like a really, really sick, cool band called The End. Premonitions of War and Zale. And Premonitions of War were like all full shaved head dudes with like, they all had the same gang tattoo on their necks right here. They were hard dudes, and they were all playing triple rectifiers like cranked. It was like one of the loudest shows I ever saw in my life. And that's the first time I saw kids doing the karate chopping and stuff like that. So
yeah,
it was, as a
the
Canadian,
kickboxing.
kid, it was an intimidating, scary place. That there was it was very dimly lit place. So it was very dark and kind of intimidating. And then there's all these dudes doing all the windmills and crazy karate chops and stuff. So as young Canadian headbanger, I was, pretty intimidated, but also very intrigued about that.
Right.
Another one that always comes to mind has happened in Calgary, and that's Soul Skater. So Mike Zwazdecki, who used to put on Hoodie Hardcore Fest and lots of shows in Calgary when we were kids, he booked a show with us in the Wolf Note, and this is in maybe 2003 or 4. So Ms. Sigs is getting big, and Wolf Note also is doing really well on their own, and they're bringing in different kids because they're kind of this, rock and roll kind of thing. So one really cold winter show, it's like December, maybe January, it's like -30, just freezing. I remember we go down there with Wolf Note and play just an absolutely packed house at what place is it? It's just a hall. It's a hall of some sort, or a Legion, sorry. It's just absolutely packed. But my friend Jay Higgs gets up on top of these speakers, and like, I just see him on top of the speakers above the crowd, and I'm thinking, you're not going to jump from there, you maniac. Certainly he does, right? And there's this girl named Sam Crimes who very, very attractive young lady, and she would always come to shows in like a dress and like high heels and everything, and she'd be right in the pit. So I remember like standing side and looking and seeing Jay and being like, oh man, you're crazy, you're not going to jump from there, are you? And certainly he does. And then I remember like looking, kind of peering through the crowd and seeing Sam Crimes standing there in her nice dress, and then fall, like, just all of a sudden, just bang, and just like
No.
see her, like, little high heels come up, like kind of jump up, and then I could just see her feet, like it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz or something like that. Just like I absolutely knocked her out cold, right? And she was a smaller little young girl, right? So it was a mean and brutal, crazy thing to do, but I mean, it definitely stuck with me.
Yeah. Wow. The 2 feet under the sea of people, that visual is stuck in my head for sure. But yeah, those great stories. I like the first one, how you were just seeing all this just over the top violence, and you're like, I'm intrigued by this, but also I'm in a place where I don't have the free healthcare, so I
Yeah,
gotta
we're in
like,
Philadelphia.
yeah, we're in Philadelphia of all places. Well, like I said, Jesse, this has been a great chat. All your links to your bands and your socials will be in the description and the show notes. If there's anything you want to plug, anyone you want to shout out, or anything you want to send the people off with before we wrap up, the floor is yours.
No, man, thanks so much for having me. Happy to do it.
Okay.
Enjoy your Saturday.
You likewise. I'll make sure the next time we cross paths, I'll make sure to hook you up with one of these. And thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Awesome, man.